Megan Collins was picked up running naked down Pennsylvania Route 666 in the Allegheny National Forest on Halloween night. She had white makeup and blood running in streaks down her face and was hysterical and had to be sedated. What follows is the horror that unfolded that October night. It was the first year Megan wasn't going trick-or-treating. She felt it was time for a fresh All Hallows Eve ritual, something more mature. She looked at her phone, opening the text thread despite not hearing a sound, seeing the message Drew sent earlier and smiling. Cemetery after dark. Ooh. Megan managed to squeeze into a white, lace-lined piece that sucked her waist into an uncomfortable size and made even her meager chest spill out of the top. She applied black makeup within each eye socket and covered the rest of her face in pure white save some bright red lipstick. She pulled on sheer white leggings and shiny white heels. Over all of this, she donned a bedsheet jaggedly cut into a point which hung only a few inches above her high heels. She stood for a moment before the body-length mirror, her arms outstretched to her sides and her ghost costume masking her body beneath. Then she grabbed her pillowcase and headed downstairs. She said goodbye to her parents, who both commented on how cute she looked but reminded her to take a jacket. The last thing her father said as she walked out of the room was, "Have fun. This might be the last year you find yourself trick-or-treating. You're getting to be too cool." She heard him say, "Ow!" behind her and out of sight, and she knew her mother had pinched him and they were smiling at one another. Megan was going to enter the cemetery on 2nd Street, but an old wood-paneled station wagon was parked at the end of the road with its back door open, so she kept going up to 3rd. The moon was nearly full, bleaching the tops of the tombstones and the shaggy grass in between. She heard Drew whistle off to her left almost immediately, and she couldn't help but start to jog towards the sound, cutting through the rows of gravestones, her smile so wide it almost hurt. She saw him standing beside a towering marble cross at the far end of the row. "Pretty scary," he said. "And what are you supposed to be? I'm a genius, can't you tell? At least you've got a sense of humor." Hey, what's that supposed to mean? With this, Drew pulled Megan towards him and kissed her red lips. Drew went in for a deeper kiss, but Megan gently pushed him away, her slender fingers and nails on his chest, her round eyes looking up, and she said, "But you haven't seen my real costume yet." Megan slid around Drew and walked in what she felt was the most provocative manner possible, trying to sway her hips while also trying to maintain her balance in the heels on the lumpy grass between the headstones. Walking towards the dark tree line, Megan dramatically crossed both arms before herself, as if flapping large wings, and she pulled the sheet off, her pale backside and white negligee glowing in the dark Halloween night. Drew raced up behind her and wrapped his arms around her and started kissing her neck, but she didn't react. "Did you see that?" "What?" "Stop. Did you see that?" "No, what?" Drew was still holding Megan from behind, his face peering up from the crook of her neck. "Someone's behind that tree." "Shut up. I'm not joking." Drew let go of Megan and stepped around her, scanning the dark tree line. He saw nothing. "Which tree?" "That big one on the right there. I can't see him anymore, but he's there." "Hey, who's there?" Drew began walking towards the tree. "Be careful, baby," Megan said as she crossed her arms, feeling goosebumps. Drew had not reached the tree when he stopped and his right arm shot up to the right side of his neck as if he was swatting a mosquito. Then he staggered to his left and dropped to the ground. "Baby?" Megan began moving towards Drew just as a dark, hooded figure emerged from the tree line, walking at a quick but controlled pace. Megan stopped so suddenly she fell backwards, her ankles buckling in the heels, and she couldn't even get out real words but only frantic noises. The black, featureless figure had stopped and Megan couldn't see what it was doing when she felt a prick in her naked thigh. A hot flash washed over her body, pulsing up and out from her thigh, and she felt dizzy and nauseous. Megan pulled out a small dart from her thigh and threw it aside in panic. All she could say was, "No, no," as the black figure approached and stopped and stood over the pale, white, lace-lined Megan. Then he picked her up and put her limp body over his shoulder and walked through the dark cemetery, the pale moonlight drawing a soft glow around the black and white mass of two bodies. The wood-paneled station wagon parked on 2nd Street still had its back door wide open. The black figure laid Megan down on the rough brown carpet and walked away. Megan could not move. Her mind just kept repeating, "No, no, no." The dark figure returned with Drew, placing him alongside Megan before gently closing the door. The station wagon started and backed out and drove away, turning on Economy Street and passing a pack of young vampires and a single pink princess. Megan was awake, but everything felt distorted and removed, as if she were witnessing this and not experiencing it. She didn't know how long they had been driving, but Megan remembers when the car slowed and turned and the smooth sound of asphalt ceased and the grind of gravel commenced. Finally, the station wagon stopped and the engine died, and she heard the driver exit, and everything was quiet except for the two teens' shallow breathing. The dark, hooded figure pulled Drew out first. He was still completely unconscious. Megan listened to the sound of footsteps slowly retreat into silence. The dark figure returned and removed Megan also, carrying her into the dark forest. There was a rancid stench Megan had never smelled before, and it was so bad it broke her drowsy state, and she could make out what she thought were other people tied to the trees passing through her shaky worldview. The figure dropped Megan roughly back to earth and tied her to a tree next to a raging fire. Across the fire from Megan and still unconscious, Drew was also tied to a tree, silent and slumped forward, his hair hanging in his face. The figure wore a black hooded cloak and stood before the fire. Silently, the cloak dropped away, revealing a pale, naked eunuch with greasy black hair. The face was angular with sunken dark eyes, the body wiry with thick, puffy scars crisscrossing the torso. The pale figure lifted both hands high, stretching them out wide and staring into the fire. They began to speak a language Megan had never heard before. The figure began to pace around the fire, hands still held high, their voice rising in intensity and pace while regurgitating this alien tongue. After circling the fire 3 times, the figure fell silent. Then this pale eunuch turned towards Megan and, sneering, reached one wiry arm behind their naked back and, as if performing a magic trick, produced a long, curved blade, seemingly from out of nowhere. They opened their mouth and an unusually large tongue unfolded out and curled down and off the chin, and they raised the curved blade, dragging it across the pink wedge of flesh, spilling dark blood over the silver edge, dripping down into the fire. Megan was weeping. The figure spoke once again in the lost and forgotten language, blood dripping from their mouth as it turned and walked around the fire to Drew. Megan could only see the pale, naked back of the eunuch through the flames. The figure stooped over Drew and Megan heard an awful scream. Megan saw commotion through the fire, the pale figure aggressively yanking and jerking before standing and turning and holding something up for her to see. In the firelight, Megan could only make out what looked like a piece of cloth. It was dripping, and the figure tossed it into the fire before turning back to Drew. Again Drew screamed, the action obscured to Megan through the fire. The pale figure stood and showed Megan the prize once more before dropping it into the flames again. She could hear Drew but not see him. The eunuch again returned to Drew, and the screaming intensified, reaching a frantic and awful pitch before cutting off in an abrupt gurgle. Megan was hyperventilating, her heart racing. The figure retrieved something from the fire. He held up a dark wand, the tip glowing orange in the night. The figure again turned to the unconscious Drew, using the wand to poke at him as if he were some sick and unknown substance. Drew awoke screaming. "Stand up." Another poke and another scream. "Stand up." Drew stood wailing, hugging the tree for support. "Walk." After a second of inaction, the figure prodded Drew with the glowing wand. Drew fell forward, sobbing. "Stand and walk." As Drew struggled to his feet and began to walk, circling the tree, Megan saw he was trailing what she thought was a thick rope behind him. The figure stood, observing Drew circle the tree as if he were some small dog about to piss. Drew made it around the tree 3 times, wrapping the tether around the tree 3 times as well, before stopping and slumping and dropping completely to the ground. The pale eunuch stood observing the body. The sound started as a low humming noise, and Megan noticed the fire begin to flicker. The eunuch turned and started speaking in the unknown language, and the fire seemed to respond to the uttered words as if they were a harsh wind, the flames first flickering, then dying down to nearly half their size, the wood crackling loudly, embers popping. The orb seemed to be made of fire, a perfect sphere of glowing orange that rose up and hung, hovering 3 feet above the flames. There was a moment of absolute silence. Not even the forest made a sound. Then the orb flashed, emitting a shockwave of orange light into the night, and was gone. The fire returned to its raging, crackling state, and the humming sound disappeared, leaving just Megan and the eunuch and the dark Halloween night. He gave a raspy laugh, and a wicked smile spread across his sunken face. The pale figure slowly circled the fire, speaking in the alien tongue, blood still spewing from between their lips. Tears had washed away the white makeup on Megan's face, and it ran down her cheeks in streaks and smears, and she looked like some kind of mad clown. The pale eunuch stood looking down at Megan before licking the open palm of his right hand and wiped it down Megan's tear-streaked face, the blood from his tongue converging in 5 red lines atop her smeared lipstick. Megan vomited, and the figure laughed in a husky, raspy voice. The pale figure knelt and held the blade to Megan's neck. Megan closed her eyes. She could taste her salty tears and the bitter blood of the eunuch. She clasped her eyelids tighter as she felt the cold tip drag lightly, not cutting, down her chest, sliding between her breasts and beneath her nightie. The blade swiped up and the garment split. The eunuch tore the tight lace piece from Megan's body and peeled her stockings off and cut the ropes that bound her, leaving her naked and crying. "Run." Megan opened her eyes. The pale eunuch stepped back, their scarred body bathed in white moonlight and the orange flames from the fire reflecting off glistening sweat. "Run now." Megan launched herself up but nearly wobbled into the fire, the eunuch laughing. Her vision was wavy and impaired, and as she staggered past the fire, she saw Drew's body and the dark, wet soles of his bare-skinned feet and a bloody trail circling the tree he was tethered to. Megan could hear the raspy laugh of the eunuch behind her in the dark as she ran, weaving back and forth into the woods. Tree branches lacerated her naked face and body, but she kept running until she tripped over something. It was some mass beside a tree, a body. Megan scrambled away on her hands and knees right into another corpse. This one was almost mummified, resting against a tree trunk with a leathery tether wrapped 3 times around the tree and ending connected to the body's belly, a macabre umbilical cord. Megan realized the tether was intestines. She vomited again. The pale eunuch was not pursuing, but she ran regardless, past corpse after corpse internally bound to the forest, their bodies in various states of decay. After a long time, when Megan finally had to stop to catch her breath, she realized the awful stench of death was no longer in the air. Not long after that, she hit the blacktop of a road and turned right and kept moving. The truck driver that stopped couldn't understand anything Megan was saying through the snot and tears. He wrapped her in a blanket and drove her directly to the police. She was transferred to a doctor's office where she was sedated, and her parents later picked her up. It was nearly 20 hours before she could relay the story to authorities. In 2012, 13 bodies were found in the Allegheny National Forest off Route 666. All met the same grim fate. They had accumulated there over an estimated period of 7 years, Drew's death being the most recent. No conclusions were ever officially reached, and the eunuch was never apprehended.